under Indonesia presidency. We are also going to discuss aspects of digital financial inclusion and MSME finance that could address the challenges and build the resilience of vulnerable and underserved groups. In addition, we will explore insights from authorities and private sectors in implementing and developing digital financial inclusion and increasing MSME finance. To begin, we are very honored to have received support from the UN Secretary General Special Advocate for Inclusive Finance for Development, Her Majesty Queen Maxima of the Netherlands. She wished to join us here today, but due to her schedule, she has provided a pre-recorded video message to support this very special event. Without further ado, let us watch together the video message from the Special Advocate.
Governor Sri Sultan Hamengku Buwono Kesupulu, Minister Indrawati, Governor Vartiyo, GPFI co-chairs, ladies and gentlemen. It is a pleasure to join you virtually today. I am delighted that some of you can be in Yogyakarta to reconnect in person. Over the past 10 years, as UN Special Advocate, I have seen the remarkable difference that inclusive digital infrastructure and digital financial services can make to people's lives, as well as to the fortunes of micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. From Indonesia to East Africa, millions of small merchants are now paid and making payments with their phones in their own pockets, transforming their ability to invest and grow. During the COVID pandemic, governments from Brazil to Togo sent emergency digital payments directly to vulnerable households, offering essential financial support at unprecedented speed. These and so many more achievements are made possible through digital infrastructure designed to meet the needs of the poor and underserved segments of societies, such as women, youth, and MSMEs. Greater connectivity and digital IDs allow access to financial services for millions previously left behind. Fair competition and interoperable payment systems help markets work better for even the smallest scale customers. Cybersecurity, consumer protection, data governance, and digital literacy allow marginalized communities to navigate these services in ways that really work for them. And where MSMEs gain access to new digital opportunities, they can make their businesses more efficient, overcome labor shortages, and open up new markets. New fintech services are helping small businesses across the global south to digitize their inventory management, marketing, payments, credit, and sales. Companies like ShopUp in Bangladesh, OmniBiz and Flutterwave in Nigeria, Udaan and Moglix in India, and Bazaar in Pakistan have been able to help small businesses expand far beyond their brick-and-mortar origins and connect to a much wider world. However, many MSMEs are still missing out on these opportunities. This is a challenge for both advanced economies and developing economies, and one we must meet together by increasing access to digital public goods, finance, and digital skills. SMEs, especially startups and firms with large growth prospects, need a range of financial services like payments, equity, short and long-term debt, savings, and insurance. To get there, we need to improve the whole digital finance ecosystem, such as credit reporting systems and insolvency regimes. The good news is that we see innovation around the world, as showcased in the GPFI's database, digital, and innovative financial products for MSMEs. I warmly welcome the work of the GPFI this year in developing the implementation guide for the G20 high-level principles for digital financial inclusion. Renewing our commitment to support women, youth, and MSMEs is essential for inclusive, equitable, and sustainable growth. We can help them thrive by embracing digital uptake, investing in skills, and improving the finance ecosystem. It is important to understand our small businesses and design and deliver to meet their needs. This includes the GPFI's work on creating a regulatory toolkit for MSMEs' access to digital financial services and a focus on harmonizing MSMEs' financing data. As the honorary patron of the G20 GPFI, I congratulate the Indonesian G20 presidency and the GPFI and its co-chairs for organizing this week's plenary sessions and for the high quality of your work. I hope governments, businesses, and development champions will use these valuable resources, enabling entrepreneurs everywhere to grow their businesses more effectively and safely and to thrive in the future. Together, we can really drive action to help us recover and build a more inclusive, resilient, and responsible digital financial system with expanded opportunities for all. Thank you very much for your commitment to this important work.
About lending to women is very, very interesting. I think there will be many questions on these issues. And then we move to a more, say, academic perspective. So more than single experiences, trying to get the whole picture about effective policies to promote MSMEs' access to finance. And let me give the floor to Professor Iwan Aziz from Cornell University. Professor Aziz, the floor is yours.
First of all, I would like to thank the Bank Indonesia and the Minister of Finance of the Republic of Indonesia for inviting me here. And given the time constraint here, I understand that Ms. Magda is under pressure now because the time is very limited. Let me just present one slide instead of several slides here. And I would like to go straight to the question raised by the organizer. When I received the invitation for this session, the organizer sent me 4 different issues for me to address. So let me address those 4 issues. And only if we have some extra time, I can show a couple of slides. And another note is that what I'm going to present and to address the 4 issues raised by the organizer is based on our field surveys on the MSME, and thanks to the Central Bank of Indonesia, who sponsored this survey. And we started the survey back in 2019, right before the COVID, and we still continue doing it now, and hopefully it will be finished by early next year. So in a way, we can see the difference between pre and post-COVID. And for that, let me go to the slide, please. Next. All right, these are the 4 issues that the organizer, in fact, I did the cut and paste here. So these are the 4 issues that the organizer sent me to address. And I think it's very clear, the issues that they raise. Number 1 is the issue of what are the challenges. The second is, what are the opportunities? And then the third is, given those challenges and opportunities, what are the policies to be taken? And last but not least is, what can make those policies effective? So in other words, the last point is about the prerequisites so that the policies proposed will be effective. And as I said, what I'm going to sort of address those 4 issues is based on our field survey since 2019. So let me first with the first issues. Next. 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 Next, next, next. 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 Yes. So essentially, given the time constraint, I will identify only 3 for each of the issues that has been raised to me. The first one is about the challenges. Definitely what we have been discussing, and many speakers already raised, and I'm sure in many other articles have been raised about the financing gap faced by many of the MSMEs. And I'm sure this is not only happening in Indonesia, but many other countries. The second is the lack of the ecosystem. And we know that when we are talking about ecosystem, the ideal ecosystem has to meet with the reality on the ground, because our respondents mostly are in the village area, in the rural areas. And the reality on the ground is that they have a lack of infrastructure. And when I'm talking about infrastructure, of course, we're talking about both hard infrastructure, from electricity availability to internet availability, all the way to the soft infrastructure. And that is something to do with the digital talent, digital capability. Many of the rural areas are not really in that level yet, especially if the MSMEs are run by the elderly, by older people who are trying to even stay away from using the digital technology. And last but not least, the third challenges faced is really the acceptance. As I indicated earlier, as if the MSME is run by the elderly, usually the degree of acceptance is low. And that can be shown by the event pre and post-COVID, as I indicated earlier, because we started the survey in 2019. We saw there is an increase in the use of the digital technology from 2019 to 2020, thanks to COVID, because they're almost like no choice for them to go into digital and so on. But then, based on the last survey, we started to see the decline in terms of the percentage of the digital technology. So, so far, what we observe is like a temporary trend of the spike in the use of the digital technology. Hopefully, this can be a catalyst for the social planners, for the policymakers, to make this temporary trend becomes more permanent. So those are the 3 points with regards to the challenges. Now goes to the opportunities. Next. Next. Again, I only focus on 3 things here. Opportunity, it's no doubt, I think in almost all countries around the world, the size and the importance of the MSME is enormous. In the case of Indonesia, those numbers are from Indonesia. So, Ms. Magda, those number is not my telephone number, but that is really a share of the MSME operation. And I'm using the case of Indonesia based on our survey. 99.9% firms are MSME. We know that. It's really dominant in terms of firms. 97% of the employment absorption, that's also important. And last but not least, 62 or even more than 62%. I heard this morning, Ministry of Finance, Sri Mulyani mentioned higher than 62% contribution to the GDP. So all in all, it's so easy to understand that if we are really serious going into inclusive growth, growth with the inclusivity, the role of MSME cannot be questioned. I mean, it's definitely far more important, and that provides the opportunity. The second is the supply chain. If we are looking at the role and the operation, the sectors in which the MSMEs are operating, almost all of them are really at the center of the supply chain. And of course, we are talking about supply chain within the country, as well as supply chain within a region, because Indonesia is so huge, so diverse, and there are about 17,000 islands in this country. You can imagine that the characteristic and the operations of the MSME throughout the countries are different from one to another. And that is also provide the opportunity. The supply chain, if we are really strengthening the MSME through the digital financing, it will almost automatically help the growth of the national economy, precisely because the role of the supply chain. So what my point here is that we should not just look at what is the contribution of MSME in terms of the number, their employment, their output, but also their role in terms of supporting the other industries. This is what we call the supply chain within the nation. So strengthening MSME, strengthening the national economy, and inclusivity, because 99.9% of the firms in the countries are really MSME. And last but not least is the change in technology. I think we all observing how the technology has been changed dramatically. And last but not least is the change in the behavior. COVID is really gave a lot of new lessons to many of us. People, and this is from both sides, from the MSME side as well as from the client side. They are more reluctant to go out, or because of the strict mobility due to the regulation during the COVID and so forth. So all these changes in technology as well as in the behavior will definitely provide new opportunities for the MSME finance through the digital technology. The next issue that the organizer asked me to address is really about the policies. What are the policies? It's very clear. I mean, you don't need to have a rocket scientist to understand that all the limitation or the challenge has to be addressed by the social planners, ranging from the infrastructure, next please, ranging from the infrastructure as well as spreading the information about the availability of the digital finance and so forth. The second is the financial innovation. If I may go back to the issue of the supply chain, one of the things that has been sort of discussing here is really, what about if rather than using collateral base and also cash flow base, why don't we use the receivable base? So in other words, if let's say there are three activities, all are in the supply lane, at least the activity number one, when they are started to sell to the activity number two, it will appear in their balance sheet. It will appear as a receivable. And that will be a source of information for the lenders, for the banking sectors. But of course, for that, the digitalizations will help a lot, because that will be seen instantly and accurately by the lenders, by the banking sector. So financial innovation is definitely one policy that need to be pursued. The next is the assisting for the interconnectedness. One of the major obstacles that we saw throughout the country, and we are going to the major islands, Java, Kalimantan, Sulawesi, and eastern part of Indonesia. One of the common obstacles that they face is really the network connectedness. It's no secret that if I am the big companies and I'm facing a problem like the COVID problem, I have network for me to find a solution of my problem. But millions of MSME cannot do that because they don't have that network. They don't have the connectedness. So one of the policies that we recommend is really trying to help MSME to have better connection, whether it's about banking, about financing, or connection with the suppliers, or connection with the larger companies. So there is interaction between MSME and the larger companies. So those are the policy response that we are suggesting here. Last but not least, the last issue that the organizer asked me to address is, what are the things that can ensure the policy recommendation is effective? Because it's easy to say, well, you need to do policy 1, 2, 3, but in practice, it's not effective. Number one is the compatibility with what is really going on the ground. For the lack of better term, we call it the social capital. The compatibility with the social capital is a must. It's a first-rate kind of a constraint, first-rate condition to ensure that any policy, including policy in the digital finance, can be well received by the MSME. And the social capital, the definition is so broad, I don't want to elaborate it, but it's almost like the mental bandwidth of the MSME. We don't know what are the operator of the MSME are facing in the rural area 24 hours a day. Maybe they're busy with the family, with the children, and so forth. In such that no matter how good is the policy, no matter how good is the facility offered by the social planner, the MSME may not be able to participate simply because of the mental bandwidth are not the same. It's almost like on one side, the policymakers running into the FM radio bandwidth, whereas the MSME are running in the AM. So there's a mismatch here. So that's why, to ensure the effectiveness of policy, we need to make sure that they are in the same bandwidth. The second is really consistency and the persistence. I was struck by the fact that I can see two types of MSME in the country. One is relatively successful and the other is not so successful. And one that are relatively successful have one common feature, and that is after being assisted, after they're given some assistance, they are monitored. Whereas the other category is they're just given assistance, that's it. And unfortunately, there are still many cases where any assistance, whether it's in terms of the credit, in terms of the equipment and so forth, when they are just given once without being monitored, without being followed by another round of monitoring and so forth, they will not perform well. So that is another conditions to ensure that any policy proposed will be effective. And last but not least is the design. In many cases, we found that it's not really the type or kind of policy that matters, but the design of it. And I have plenty of examples, but because of the time constraint, I'm not going to do that. Now, last point that I want to share here is that it's easy for me, for everybody to speak in a seminar like this about this is what needs to be done and so forth. But at the end of the day, we believe that everything has to be putting in a loop. We have to experiment, and in some cases it fails, in some cases it works. So practically speaking, just identify what works and what did not work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Aziz, for your very insightful presentation. You managed in such a short time to give an overall picture, very consistent and somehow very coherent. It was very good to have you at the end of this panel because you managed to bring about a consistent structure for policy interventions. And I think the last point that you made about monitoring single experiences, but also monitoring policies is what we should all do whenever we introduce, well, we vary our policies or we try a different way to intervene in the markets. So that's a very useful point to conclude. But I hope we will have more time to hear from you answering questions. So it's time for question and answers. I have at least one on the chat, but if there are some in presence, please do ask your questions. Maybe share your name and your institutions, and if you want, to whom you are addressing the question. Maybe I can ask